with family. We had something every night, and I get made fun of because we put our Christmas decorations up so early. I also get made fun of because we take them down so early. The moment someone walked out of our house, the last person walked out of our house on Christmas night, it started coming down. And 2 hours we spent that night, and then the next morning I got up at 5 something, and we spent another 5.5 hours, and I was up on the roof in shorts and my house shoes, taking off the lights off the dormers on the roof, and it starts raining. And I look up at the sky and I said, you can rain all you want to. I will not step off this roof till every light is down. And I got off that ladder soaking wet with every light done. And it is back to normal at the Clendenen's house.
What's normal?
I just said that so you all can judge me. Guys, back to business. God has laid something on my heart this morning. And I'm just going to be honest from the outset here. I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers for anything, really. But I certainly don't have all the answers for this. And my heart is heavy even talking about this subject. And I know that it will step on the feet of some. Maybe all of us. Because we've all found ourselves in one of these places at some time or another. You ever really been in a place of desperation in prayer? And you really, really needed God to do something for you? I don't think there's a person in here that can say, no, I've never been there. We've all been there. And that's great. When we get to the place where we're dependent upon Him. And it's almost like we sit down at a bargaining table with God and we negotiate the terms of the contract that our prayer and that's all good. We step up in faith and we set the terms of the prayer contract, really. And that's wonderful, especially the times that at the end the contract is fulfilled. But what do we do when we feel like that we've had a breach of contract? When the outcome is not what we set forth in the terms that we negotiated with God. Am I talking to anybody this morning? Say, God, it's this, and I need you to do this. And inevitably, it doesn't turn out that way. I have been thinking and praying because really, it relegates us to one of three positions, and I've been in all three of these. The first one is this. It's a breach of contract on us. I failed in some way. I broke the contract, number one, because I'm not good enough. I don't deserve for God to do this in me. I'm not worthy of that. Or perhaps we even add this term in there. I didn't have enough faith. Has anybody ever been there? It's just because my faith was lacking. That's why this didn't happen. Can that be the case? I mean, I suppose so. There's times in the Bible Jesus says He could do no miracles there because of their unbelief, their lack of faith. And there's over and over and over in the Bible times that Jesus says your faith has made you whole. So certainly faith has power. But that does not mean that every time the contract is not fulfilled, that it means that you've not had enough faith, and it's an error to stand there. Amen. It's the truth. I saw an article on Facebook the other day, and it says you can have what you want. Let me be honest with you. I have not found how I can have enough faith to bend the will of God. I don't even believe that's a possibility, nor should we try to alter God's will. Maybe that's the place that you're in. It's me. And we just end up in self-hatred. I'm not enough. My faith isn't enough. Or maybe this. We feel like God Himself has breached the contract. He's broken it. God, you didn't do it. I stood in faith. I prayed. I called the prayer chain in the church. I came forward. I was anointed by oil, as the Bible says, and the prayer of faith will save the sick. Called for the elders. I did everything, God, but you didn't do it. And instead of self-hatred, we find ourselves in a place of disillusionment with God. Has anybody ever been there before? Well, I thank God that 3 other people are honest, and I'm going to alter and start talking about liars will find themselves and everything. Obviously, we've all been there at times. And it alters our image of the one that we're serving. Because we feel like he's broken the terms that was negotiated on the table of prayer. Father, you didn't do it. And if it's, I didn't have enough faith, or I'm not good enough, or I failed in some way, all of a sudden, it's him. Now let me tell you, as a believer, it's hard to even verbalize those words. And honestly, that's a feeling that is resident in a lot of us at different times, but you'll never know it because we're not bold enough to admit that. And we stop running to him with that. Let me be honest, church. God can take that emotion in you. Where we get in trouble is when we stop running to him. And I just made a decision a long time ago. I don't care if I'm angry. I don't care if I'm frustrated, if I'm hurt, if I'm disillusioned. I'm going to him with whatever emotion it is that I have. Because the moment I hold that in and refuse to admit the reality of where I am, that's when a big mess starts happening. So either it's us that's broken the terms, or we put it on him and say, God has broken the terms. Or there's a third category, and we dismiss this in pain, and it's genuine. I'm not saying it's not genuine because I've done this as well. It must not have been his will. Now, that's a tough place to be as well. It must not have been his will. It must not have been his will. And we even say that holding anger in our hearts because it wasn't his will. Or maybe we've accepted it. You know, God, it just wasn't your will. I don't see any other recourse when the terms aren't kept. Have we failed? Have we breached the contract because our faith wasn't enough or we weren't worthy enough? Did he breach the contract? Has he the one that broke the terms and has left me disillusioned? Or did I just have to dismiss it in pain, saying, must not have been his will? After all, Jesus taught us to pray, God, your will be done, your kingdom come. And we always make a mistake when we assume that we know what God's will is. And you can say this in terms of healing. Okay, let's take healing and I'm going to be very real here today. Will every single person be healed? I don't think so. Does that mean that God's not a miracle-working God? Certainly not. We've all experienced it and seen the healing of God. Will everyone be raised from the dead? No. Does it take away from the fact that he has resurrection life that can bring the dead back to life? No. Because at the same time, his word says it's appointed unto man once to die. That time's coming. I've never found anybody that has been able to escape that. Interesting. I was following, and many of you have followed this, and asked me questions about it on the saga unfolding out at Bethel. How many people have been watching that story? There was a young girl, 2 years old, Olive. Her parents are renowned worship leaders. I've listened to a lot of their stuff. Baby stopped breathing on December the 14th. And an amazing faith emerged in them as the baby was pronounced dead. And I think it was like 6 days or something. A hashtag just showed up all over the world. Wake Up Olive. That's the baby's name. And they mobilized not only their church, the entire Christian world to stand and believe for this baby's resurrection for 6 days. That's fascinating to me, and it's powerful. Number one, I applaud them on that level of faith because it's amazing. But I also read an article yesterday that they've come to terms with the fact that this isn't happening, and they've transitioning in hope, as their pastor preached a sermon. Transitioning in hope, and they're planning a memorial service for her. Let's use that as an illustration this morning in terms of our contract. Number one, was there not enough faith? I've never seen a level of faith like that personally. I pray that I would have that amount of faith. Was there not enough faith? Did man breach that contract? Is that why it didn't happen? Did God fail them? Did God break the terms? Or do we just dismiss it, saying, no, it wasn't his will? To be honest, I don't have all the answers this morning. But that story resonated with me because I think it's a place that all of us have been in at least one time or the other, where we have come to the table with God and we've mustered as much faith and prayer as we can muster, and we lay it in his hands, and inevitably it didn't turn out the way that we thought it was going to turn out, and we are stuck in the land of one of those three places. In Mark chapter 5, we're going to begin in verse 21. And I want to just maneuver through this. Man, it's heavy in here this morning. Maneuver through this story, and I want us to see if we can learn anything. Verse 21 of Mark chapter 5. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. And then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him honestly, saying, my little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live. And he went with him. Let's stop there. This is such a peculiar story. This guy has we'll find out in a moment, she's 12 years old. Let me just address the mothers here for a moment. Is there anything that you wouldn't do for your children? My mom used to say something that made absolutely no sense to me until I became a parent myself. When I was sick, it didn't matter if it was the croup or chicken pox or the flu, or I had a chronic case of schoolitis through 1st through 12th grade. It didn't matter what it was. My mom always said the same thing. If I could take this from you and put it on me, I would. I'm like, no, you wouldn't. I feel terrible. And then I became a parent, and I saw when my son was hurting, I'm telling you, there would be nothing that I would do. Let's look at the lengths that this guy went, Jairus. He was a member of the synagogue. He was a leader of the synagogue. Let me tell you something, guys. Jesus was not a popular figure. They hated him. They absolutely despised Christ because he came, what they understood, to abolish everything that they stood for. They saw Jesus as a threat, claiming the title as Messiah and Savior. They called him the King of the Jews, and people were leaving them and going out after Christ. And it angered them. He would call them names. He called them out on their hypocrisy. Nobody likes being called out on their hypocrisy. But all of a sudden, when this guy's daughter is at the point of death, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in the least what it takes to get it done. I want this change. I will do whatever I have to do for my child to live. And this man seeks Jesus out. That was a big point of faith for him right there, because he did not like Christ. None of the leaders of the day liked him. They hated him. And this man had a point of faith. Now, it's very different from the centurion that we find in Matthew chapter 8. The centurion came and his servant was ill, and Jesus says, "Oh, I'll go with you." And the man makes a very profound statement in faith and says, "Hey, you don't have to go with me. I'm a man that under authority, and I am over authority. I understand the word authority. Just speak the word and he'll be made well." You remember that story? And it happened exactly like this. Like Jesus commends him on his faith. I haven't found faith like this in all of this. This is amazing, man. Just speak the word, okay. And he speaks the word, and come to find out, the man was healed at the very hour that Jesus spoke the word. That wasn't the point of faith in this story. This man comes up and he says, "Come to my house now. My daughter is sick. I need you to come." And that was his point of faith. So he goes out to Christ, and they sat down at the bargaining table, and they negotiated out the terms in this man's mind. I've come to Christ. You're coming to my house. We're going to leave this place immediately. We're going to my house, and you're going to heal my daughter. That's how this is going to play out. And those were the terms. It didn't quite happen that way. Let's continue. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. You know, I've always thought about this next little passage from the perspective of the woman, from the perspective of the crowd. I've never thought about it from the perspective of the man who went and sought out Jesus. I want us to read this story from his perspective. A great crowd followed him and thronged about him. I'm imagining he's holding Jesus by the hand, and they are just trying to get there as quick as they possibly can. I mean, that's what a parent would do, right? You don't want to lollygag. You don't want to stop and get a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. You are getting there because it is a situation of desperation, and all of a sudden, crowds are just all about them, thronging about them. And I can imagine he loses hold of Jesus' hand. He's like, "Come, would you please hurry up?" Men, kind of like we do with our wives in the mall. Just thought I'd throw that in there for your... See, a very relatable point here at Christmas. And people are thronging about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. Who had suffered under many physicians and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. And she heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. Okay, think about this from the perspective of the dad. You've gotten over yourself and what all your friends at the synagogue think about Jesus, and you've sought him out to heal your daughter. Had to swallow your pride to get there. Sit down at the terms, at the bargaining table of prayer and faith. You're going to come, and then he gets in a crowd's like all around. It's like, "God grief, come on." And then a woman jumps line. Let me tell you something. I don't like line jumpers. I don't care if it's Walmart. That's the most... this is Rabbit Trail and a soapbox, okay? I don't care if it's at Walmart or at Disney World. Those are the worst. You've waited for 3.5 hours to ride something that lasts like 4 seconds. And right when you're about... Somebody just jumps in... You deserve life imprisonment for that. Facetious there. Kind of. This woman jumps line. He is in a situation, an emergency situation. And he sought Jesus out. He has gotten over himself, over his pride. He's mustered faith to go get somebody that he doesn't even like, per se. And they're going, and the crowd separates them, and a woman stops line. And instead of Jesus saying, "I'll get to you next. I'm with Jay Iris right now. It's his turn." Jesus gives the woman his attention. That's not very nice. That wasn't in the terms. And if I was that man, I would be ticked completely off. rolling your eyes at Jesus like, would you come on? Jesus is like, somebody touch me. Someone has touched me. I mean, I get it. I don't like to be touched in crowds either. But it wasn't that. And the disciples were like, Jesus, what's wrong with you? Of course you've been touched. You're in a massive throng of people here. He said, no, this is different. Power went out from me. And instead of saying, guys, keep everybody here, we're going to go through a question here in a little bit. We're going to interrogate everybody, and I'm going to find out who touched me. But I've got to go somewhere right now. I've just sat at the table with this man, Jairus. We've come to terms. I'm going to his house, and I'll be back. Keep everybody here. Don't let one person leave. I mean, that would be kindness. That would be priority. You were here first. But that's not what Jesus does. He stops. Who touched me? And when that woman touched him, the flow of blood had dried up. And Jesus, perceiving in power, in verse 30, that had gone out from him, immediately turned to the crowd and said, who touched me? And the disciple said, you see the crowd pressing about you, and you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And at that point, if I was Jay, I would say, it was this woman, let's go. She's messed up, please. We're going to my house now. Remember? Don't you remember the negotiation terms that we set? You're coming with me, coming to my house. This is an emergency, okay? This is not a case of schoolitis that she has. This is deathly ill. Please, woman, get out of the way. And Jesus says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed. And while he's still speaking, this is the moment that I would be struggling. And I dare say there's people here right now that are not only in this place, you've been living in this place. While he's still speaking to the woman, somebody comes from the house, tears streaming, says, leave him alone. She just died. Imagine the emotions flooding through this guy at this time. At first, I would blame the woman. Like, he would have gotten there in time if this woman wouldn't have done this. This wasn't what we agreed upon. Or maybe he was a self-loather. If I would have only gone to Jesus quicker. If I would have swallowed my pride earlier and gone to the one that I didn't even like. No, it's you. That's not what we agreed upon. Then I'd blame the woman. It's your fault. I had a bargain with God. And you stepped in the way, and now my daughter is no more, and it's your fault. Has anybody ever lived in those places? Because we're trying to wrap our carnal, finite minds around something that is impossible for us to do. You know, there's a verse that's so simple, but it's so impossible for us to understand. His ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are greater than our thoughts. It sounds so nice. And it is, until it comes into conflict with what my thoughts are for him. And the blame game's going back and forth, and this person's crying, and this man has to just throw his hands up. How would you feel as a parent being let down by the one that you placed all of your hope in? How would you feel as a dad of a daughter if you were in that place? Where would you be? Would you hate yourself? Would you be disillusioned with him? Would you be angry with him? Would it be somebody else's fault and you're playing the blame game? You're questioning every decision that's been made for the last 12 years of their life. If I would have only spent more time with them. I wished I would have given them more quality time. And just battling back and forth in this turmoil. Guys, that's what you call life. And if you're not in it right now, it's coming. Where we have this battlefield that we didn't ask for. And we certainly don't want to be in. And that brings us to a real truth. You cannot negotiate the will of God. See, we think we can. If I could only bend that. God's placed it in your hands to bend that. I don't believe God's will can be negotiated because at its core, God's will is His, not mine. But we assume that power in ourselves. And after the distraction and what this man would term as a breach of contract, after hearing the defeat in verse 35 that your daughter's dead, stop bothering this man. And now the man can go back to hating Christ, being part of the group at the synagogue that's trying to get rid of him. Jesus dares speak. And he says to Jairus, in brokenness, in pain, in disillusionment, in hurt, in fear, in the tug of war, in the myriad of emotions that he's walking through at this moment, Jesus dares say, don't be afraid. Just believe. Look at him just looking up at Jesus. Tear-flooded eyes. Don't be afraid. Just believe. Believe. How dare you? To call the belief I had to run to you in the first place. Believe. I was believing. Don't you remember when we sat down at the table and I said, you come to my house? That was my stance of belief, saying, you come. I believe that this will alter the situation. You're touching an area that's very sensitive right now, Jesus. Believe. See, with God, it's always about something greater than what we think it's about. We think it's about this one thing. But what God is doing is digging in an issue of our heart. And trying to touch something that honestly, most of the time, I don't personally want him to touch. Or anybody else. I just assume keep that in the dark. Thank you very much. But God knows. He says, don't be afraid. And he walks into this. In verse 36, after saying this, don't be afraid, only believe. And in verse 37, he says, he allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, and the brother of James. John, the brother of James. And they come to the house. So all of a sudden, this huge crowd that's thronging about Christ has turned into 4 people. Peter, James, John, Jairus, Jesus. That's 5. I can't count. It's Christmas break still. Kids. Peter, James, John, Jesus, Jairus. The 5 of them return to the home. It's been downsized. And this is what they found upon the arrival. And this should be no surprise. This wasn't someone that had lived a long, rich life. It was a 12-year-old girl that was taken far too soon. After hope had been placed in Christ. I don't have the answers this morning. But I can tell you, that might not be my story. But we all have one that's similar. Your story might read a little differently. But we've all been in that place where we've been disillusioned and frustrated and disappointed. We've all been in the tug of war of, is it me? Did I not have enough faith? How have I failed? Or is it you? And we go through the questions of maybe he's not the God that I believe that he has been my whole life. Maybe that doesn't happen anymore. That only happened for them. God, you failed me. Maybe we've lived there. Or maybe we've just dismissed it as, oh, it just wasn't his will. But we're angry about it. And they show up. Now, this is not a friendly place he shows up. If you remember, these people, members of the synagogue, rulers of the synagogue that stood against him openly and violently. He shows up. Imagine the jeering, the sneers, the harsh looks across the room, especially from the mother. When Jesus shows up, I could see her looking at Jairus and just shaking her head and then looking at Christ. Why did you come here? It says there's wailing. I would imagine so. It would be uncontrollable. There was a commotion. There's people weeping. There's those that have accepted that this is the way this is going to be. And Jesus, once again, touches that issue. Think about this question in context. Why are you making a commotion and weeping? What do you mean, why? That is a mother grieving her 12-year-old daughter's loss. What do you mean? Why are you crying? I can feel the blood boiling in this woman. Can't you? How dare you come into my house in this place of grief and make a statement like that? How dare you? And then he goes on to say, this child is not dead. She's only asleep. And then collectively, the wailing, the commotion, the weeping, the mourning, the grief, collectively turns into a glorious laughter at the bold, outlandish statement that Jesus Christ just made. Why is everybody weeping? She's only taking a nap. And they're just laughing at him. Before they can throw him out of their house, Jesus says, everybody get out. As they're laughing at him, he says, out. That's a pretty nice privilege to be able to throw people out of their own house. Where are we going? We live here. Out. All you people crying, get out. Get out of here. You wailers. You commotion stirrers. Everyone, out. And they listened. Every one of them walked out. Except, here we are. Now we're up to 6. He put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him. And they went in where the child was. So let's look at what we have here. Peter, James, John, Jesus, Jairus, wife. Jesus was a master at kicking things out where they didn't belong, though. And you remember he goes into the temple. There's people doing things they shouldn't. He just overturns tables like crazy and says, get out. We work here. Not anymore. Get out. You've turned my father's house into a den of thieves. Out. He shows up. There's 2 demon-possessed men. And he says, get out. You don't belong here. Out. Jesus kicked people out of this place. Why did he do that? Well, there's a lot of theories. Maybe they were annoying him. Maybe because of unbelief. He wanted to work a miracle right there, and he didn't need anybody doubting. Maybe he didn't want this spread. As a matter of fact, the story ends with he told them not to tell one person what's happened. That's going to be difficult. And as the 6 of them are in there, he reaches down and he touches this dead girl. He grabs her by the hand and he says, Talitha Kumi, which is to say, little girl, I say to you, arise. Now, let's go back to the beginning. A very desperate situation has happened. And I want you to begin to think about yourself. We've come to him, even if it wasn't like bargaining, it was in our minds. You know, this is how it's going to happen. And we've gone through all of these things of distractions and defeat even. Stop bothering this man, to grief and emotions and all of these things. And now, these people are not pleased. They're not happy, but they're in there with Jesus. And he touches their daughter. And says, arise. Before they could even think, though, before they could even think, how dare you touch her? The girl gets up and began walking, for she was 12 years old. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. So this is awesome. Fear, trembling, commotion, weeping, grief, wailing, turned into laughter, and now there's 6, and all of them are left with amazement. As a little girl has been brought back to life. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and he told them to give her something to eat. Now, I feel like I got a pretty good confidence level. You know, I can keep confidence and I can keep a secret. I don't know that I can keep that. Could you? Don't tell anybody. You just raised my daughter from the dead. Don't tell anybody. No, this is just for you. This one's for you. I don't want this tainted out there. Just hold that. Let this be something that sets a course for the rest of your life. Don't cast your pearls before swines here, guys. You've experienced something. Just hold that. This is going to be your treasure box that you'll open and give me praise with. Don't taint it down by letting everybody else know this. It's this awesome moment. But I want us to look at what happened. They sat down at the bargaining table, the negotiating table of prayer, and walked through the process that we've spent the last half hour discussing. Even to the point where he failed. In their eyes. And then Jesus does the impossible. I can't promise you that God will always do what you want him to do in the manner that you want him to do it. To be honest, God's pretty creative. And completely honest, I don't think I want to pigeonhole him in the box that my mind can create. I also can't promise you that God will do what he's going to do in the timing that lines up with yours. Guys, if you've got God on a clock, you might as well break the clock and throw it outside. It doesn't work that way. How many times in the scripture Jesus did this exact thing just to show up at the time he wanted to show them, I'll do this when I want to, not on your time frame. Because there's something more important. Maybe he needed those emotions to come to full froth before he could deal with the heart of the issue. Maybe he needed them in a place of disillusionment for him to set that in their life. To have faith in God the rest of their life. I have no idea every bit of its supposition. But I know for a fact that Jesus came in his timing. And he did his will in his timing. And no matter what Jairus did and struggled, he couldn't have fought that and bended that with all the strength and faith he could have mustered. But it doesn't keep us from trying. I can't promise you that his timing will always line up with yours. I can't promise you that the methodology that he uses will be the one that you want him to use. Man, that is so frustrating because my ways are so amazing. What about yours? Build these elaborate things for God to do, and you're going to do it in this way, God, and then I will end up giving you praise in this way. I remember things a decade ago that I said, God, if you would do this, and I don't know why, this was my point of faith. I will publicly run around the church. I'll run a lap, God. If you do it this way, this is the way my responding praise will be. Ha-ha, here it is, done, sealed. Shh. And do it that way. God has some pretty creative methodologies. Once again, don't pigeonhole him. I can't promise you that in the old cliche it will be a bed of roses. And that you won't have an emotional struggle and a mental battle and everything else that ensues. Because the truth is, you more than likely will. But it's important. Because one thing, if I do know, there's a process that every Christ follower will have to will have to walk through at some time in their life. And I think it's a lifelong process. And it's the process of brokenness. It's one of the most needed and used processes of God, that he breaks us and gets rid of our flesh, where all that's left is this workable clay that he can mold into something that's usable for him. But God, that hurts. God's walk is willing for me to walk through a painful process if it brings him glory in the end, guys. I mean, there's people that I think got a raw deal. And I've even spoke on this recently. The man born blind. It is such a frustrating thing. Because I've been that blind man. Jesus, what happened that this man was born blind? Who sinned? Was it his parents? Was it him? Did he have a premeditated sin in the womb that made him come out blind? Why is this way? It's like, you'll find out. I've allowed this man to be blind his whole life for this moment in time, because right now I'm about to get my name some praise. Richie version. He said, no, it's been this way so that the glory of God can be revealed in him. If you need the verse exactly, there you go. You're here to tell me that this man walked through hell on earth for decades. For this? Yeah, that's it. But watch this. And all of a sudden, whoa! See, we don't think we serve that kind of God, but we do. And He uses these things in our life, man, that we would define as the most painful, disgusting, dark times in our life. And the whole time, God is like digging His finger into something in our heart. He says, I want that. And we can fight it. And let me tell you what fighting it does. It delays the process because He's not going anywhere.
Amen. Thank you, Jesus.
The worst thing we can do is fight the process of brokenness. No, not me. God is adamant to have every part of our hearts. And what we withhold from Him, He is adamant, I will have that. Now we can hold out. We can stand. That's a battle you're going to lose, my friend.
Amen.
He will have that. He will have it. Where do we find our hope in this? If it's not us that's failed, if it's not Him that's failed, what's it all about? I think it's found in the first 5 words of verse 24 at the negotiating table. And we sing about it this morning. Instead of going with an end in mind, instead of saying, God, you're going to do it this way in this timing, we're going to be undeterred, we're going straight there. Those first 5 words say, and He went with Him. And He went with Him. We sing songs like, nothing else, Lord. Nothing else will do. I just want You. We don't need to sing that if we don't mean it. What we need is that. God, I give You the future. I give You the methodology. I give You my plans. Even if it's not what You want to do, Lord, I choose Your will. I just want You to go with me. That, my friend, is the secret of life, of following Christ. Because that right there is the most valuable thing that we have, is the fact that He's here with us. You might be in hell right now. You might be in the fight of your life right now. In the darkest time, in the most disillusioned time, in the most frustrated time. But you're going to make it, and I'll tell you why. Because He's there with you. Amen. There's not a place that you can go that He won't be there. Because He made us a promise, and He said, I promise you I'll never leave you, I'll never forsake you. Even till the end, I will be there. If you're in the valley of the shadow of death, I'm there. If you're walking through fearful times, I'm there. If you're mad at me, I'm there. If you're disillusioned, I'm there. Guys, that's what we need more than anything. We just want You. Nothing else. Nothing else will do. I just want You. I can't promise you that it's going to be easy, because it'll cost you everything. You know, I don't believe in New Year's resolutions because I've never kept one past 3 days. But I do believe in us making some decisions, that there are certain things that we're not going to take with us any further.
Yes. Amen.
And it's time that we be honest with ourselves about what's in the room of our hearts. And it's time that we make a decision to kick some things out of the room so God can do what He wants to do in our lives.
Amen.
I believe in this room right here, there's discouragement in this room, and it doesn't need to go into 2020 with you. As a matter of fact, it doesn't need to go into 12 o'clock with you.
Amen.
There's some depression in this room that need not go one step further. There's disillusionment in this room today that needs to be kicked out. Unbelief is in this room today. Fear is in this room today. Anger and bitterness is in this room today. Oh, there's a feeling of abandonment in this room today too. God, you abandoned me at my worst time. It's present in this room, and it's time for us to kick it out so God can do what he wants to do. Amen. What's in you? Because it need not take one step further. I love the fact that the story ends with Jesus kicking out things that doesn't need to be there. Amen. He's so good at it. Man, he's good at it. He is awesome at kicking things out that don't belong. Maybe you got it all together. I'm a wreck. And as I've been doing some truthful evaluation of Richie's heart, there's things I want out. And if it means me getting over my pride and revealing it, then there it is, baby. I don't want it to step further. What about you? Father, as we come before you today, Lord, I feel like there's a lot of us here that feel like that the contract has been breached. The terms have not been walked through. And there's many that's questioning themselves. And there's even more that's questioning you, Lord. And the truth is, you're wanting to touch something, God. And until we allow that to be kicked out of the room of our lives, we are delaying the process. Holy Spirit, I pray that you speak to us right now. Reveal to us and illuminate what's in our lives. Lord, I think there's disillusionment here that people wouldn't have even said it in those terms. There's an abandonment here